Hi everyone, it's Sir Rithkin from Ontier with the Murder of Dukes interviews, and tonight I am with Duke Quilliam from Ealdormere. Welcome, Your Grace.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for agreeing to do this. As we were talking a little bit before we went live, you are my first Duke from Ealdormere, so you're filling in this gap of culture for me, which I really appreciate. And also, I have sort of secondhand knowledge of you through Dogmare from a long time ago when she was journaling her fight journey before you guys reigned. So that's kind of cool too for me to actually put a face to the name.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
I'll do my best to represent Ealdormere. It's a lot of shoes I'm standing in here, so hopefully no one.
Well, I don't expect you to represent everything or to talk for your kingdom, but it is kind of cool to get the cultural flavor from each of the kingdoms. Interkingdom anthropology is something I think is kind of cool. Anyway, so I usually start these with your Sca Origin Story. And so if you could tell me where, when, and how old you were when you found the Sca, that would be great.
So I first came to an event when I was 12. I had grown up reading fantasy and being obsessed with knights and dragons and whatnot. And the Sca group in Toronto used to practice in Philosopher's Walk, which is at the University of Toronto, where my parents both went to school. So my sister and I grew up being very into medieval things. And I guess when I was around 12, they looked it up online and found an event near us. And I basically was hooked from like walking through the door. So I basically walked in, fighting was happening. I walked to the fighting field and I stayed there for 8 hours and watched every single moment that I could possibly watch. So, and from there it was just, I got obsessed with it. Joined the youth combat program. So Ealdormere was starting, actually His Grace Edward the Red was starting a youth combat program at that point. And I got involved in that. And it was beautiful because they had basically loaner gear and opportunity available to jump in kind of right from the jump. So I first started doing boffer fighting when I was 13, 14, and then kind of was hooked from there.
Oh, very cool. So did you have a mentor as you were boffer fighting? Were you paged to anyone or squired?
So I was paged to Kennedy the Kid, who actually now lives out in BC. He and I worked together for a bit. I ended up squiring to Sir Etienne Naval of House Rogan, but through Kennedy, one of Kennedy's squires at the time, Wad of Sarum, he is actually Dagmar's knight. And he was one of my really close training companions pushing up through that early part of my life. We fought at like the same 3 fight practices. And it was actually he and I in the finals of the first crown tournament that I won. We'd been fighting each other every week for a year and ended up being the 2 people in the finals of crown tournament. So,
well, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So how much did the youth combat translate into heavy combat?
It's interesting. Like, I think it's both a leg up and a bit of a step back at the same time, because I spent a lot of time having to unlearn things that I learned from fighting boffer. And there's I was in a very weird place because I was basically the size that I am now at age 15. So I had to really tone down my calibration. I had to basically fight at like touch calibration when I was younger. And then there was the jump when I turned 16 going into full rattan combat. In Ealdormere at the time, rattan combat started at 16. And actually at Pinzik, which was our big war, you couldn't fight rattan until you're 18. So I ended up having to fight rattan in Ealdormere for 2 years. And then I went to Pinzik and fought. Well, my wife's saying that the video is not running on her end. I'm not sure if that's.
I'm seeing it.
Okay. Fair enough. Sorry, just thought I'd.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, so I actually was fighting youth combat at Pinzik like 6 months before I won my first crown tournament because of that weird mishmash. So there was a lot of going back and forth between this like touch calibration world and this full contact world, which was kind of hard for me to navigate, but it gave me the like movement and really like measure and distancing and spacing and spatial awareness of my body at an earlier age than I think a lot of people get if they start at even like say 20, because you're kind of growing into your body, developing that knowledge of footwork and spacing and everything. So.
Were you able to fight at the heavy practices with the heavy fighters using boffer swords? Like that's something we do sometimes for our youth fighters.
We did a bit of that. It was youth combat was still in its early stages when I was doing it in Ealdormere, and because at 16 I was able to fight rattan, it was only like about a 2.5 year period. It was more the going to Pinzik and having to fight boffer after fighting rattan in Ealdormere that was the issue. But there was some when I went down to Detroit, there were some of the guys who would do that with me, where they would put the rattan stick in my hands and fight with the boffer on their end. So.
So let's talk about your training and your obsessiveness. I mean, if you used the same word I think I used before we went live, with fighting, because you did win a crown before you were knighted, and I think you were 18, right?
Yeah, I just turned 19 when I won my first crown. So I turned 19 in October, and I won in November of that year. I won my first crown. So yeah, obsessive is a great word. Like I lived and breathed fighting, and I was doing 3-4 fight practices a week, driving to Detroit at every opportunity that I had, fighting on the weekends, and even within events, like fighting on the pickup fields for the entire duration of the event as long as I could. So it was really an obsession for me, to the point where I even changed the decisions that I was making around like my life and where what I was doing, what I was choosing to do for school, because of that.
So. What part of
my wife is still gesticulating at me that this is not working on the background.
Oh.
There's a couple people outside too that are messaging her and saying that it's not running. So, I don't know if it's
maybe if I share it again and make sure that or actually my sister's watching. Hey, Ashaxi, okay. Will you share this publicly and maybe tag Quilliam? His name is Bryn Evering, and then his people can find it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What part of Ealdormere were you in, and how far away were the fight practices you were going to from where you lived?
So I grew up in Coburg, which is about an hour and 15 minutes east of Toronto. So my fight practices at that point were Skeldergate, which is just north of Toronto, so about an hour, Ajax, which was 45-50 minutes, and then Hamilton, which was an hour and a half-ish for me. And I was regularly doing those three every week. So,
then you also went to Detroit quite a bit. How far was that for you?
Detroit was 5.5 hours for me. So we would drive down the Sunday. Oftentimes I would do an event on the Saturday, sleep over wherever the event was, and then drive to Detroit on the Sunday, and then come back Sunday night late. So it was a lot of my life dedicated to that.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
And Sunday, like having a 5.5 hour drive after fighting, and then having to work on Monday is a lot.
Yeah, the nice thing for me was there were a fair number of people who were willing to go with me or were orchestrating trips that I could go with. So instead of being one person in the car, it's 2 or 3 people in the car. And that makes, I was kind of in my happy place because you can spend 2.5 hours talking about the fighting that happened and then another 2 hours talking about the event that's coming up and kind of debriefing everything, right? So yeah. It was good from that standpoint, but there were also some days where it was just me in the car and I was just trying not to fall asleep.
Did you have some sort of understanding with like Bronies or Ragnvaldr about like them training you or mentoring you?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't want to put words in their mouths. There's a household connection from far back. Like my knight's knight was cirrhosis, and there's familial ties going back between him and Darkyard, and he's very close with Barris, who was my knight's squire brother. So I would say they took me under their wing as well, and I got close with a lot of guys down there. So I got made fun of at the border one time because I was coming down for Sir Balthazar's knighting, and it was before Facebook when we all know each other's names. So I'd driven down from Toronto to go to Balthazar's knighting, and I was at the border, and they're like, "So what are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm coming down for a medieval event." They're like, well, that's really far for you to come by yourself. Is there anything in particular? I'm like, well, yeah, well, my friend is getting this big award. They're like, well, what award is it? I'm like, well, he's getting knighted. And they're looking at me like, and what's his name? I'm like, Sir Balthazar. And they're like, so what you're telling me is you drove 5.5 hours to see a guy whose real name you don't know get knighted. And I was like, yes, I don't know what to tell you. So,
Yeah, I'm laughing because I can relate to that, because we used to, when Avacol was part of Ontario, we used to fly up to Edmonton, and they'd ask where we were going, and you wouldn't know the person's real name. I'm going to so and so's house. Yeah, or where they lived, because they're picking you up, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's
it's different now with Facebook because we all know each other's real names, but
definitely. So in addition to fight practices, what other kinds of training did you do?
So I've never really been a PEL or anything like that fighter. What I would say is I've always done an extensive cardio program in conjunction with my training. And I think there's two components that go with that I would always encourage people to think of. So I think there's this aspect of crown training, which has to be a mental, or not crown training, but training in general, which has to be a mental aspect. I know I'm jumping ahead here on your interview.
No, it's fine.
So what I personally have always found is that the best time for me to do visualization is during cardio. So I would encourage people when they're training, particularly cardio, to leave their iPod at home and leave their music at home, and literally spend the 45 minutes that you're running around the block picturing winning, picturing the actual how the fights break down, picturing your competition, picturing how you're going to beat them. And I think that is a huge aspect of how you train your mind to win, because that I've never heard someone lose a tournament because their cardio was great. So it's a bonus, right? Like the longer you can go and the fresher you can be, the better it is. And then to add in that mental training aspect during that time, I think is a really key component.
I think that's a great tip. A lot of times when I'm doing my cardio, I will watch fight video of either myself or someone else, and I kind of do the same thing, where you're sort of internalizing either things you want to steal or things you want to make better with you, or
Sure.
just sort of implement into your muscle memory. So I think that's a great tip. Did you do anything to learn how to visualize? I know some people have a hard time with like meditation or visualization.
So I would say for me, the visualization is less about the actual physical, like picturing the shot and picturing the spacing, and more about like picturing the feeling of success and like I am going to win. This is my day. This is my tournament. Picturing the end result. And I found for me, that's the best way to carry that forward over the hump. So like there's a degree of how's this fight going to go? How's that fight going to go when it's somebody that you're super familiar with? But I think also just that like basically training your brain to walk into a tournament with no other outcome other than victory being possible. So when you walk in, your brain says, I've already won this tournament. And then you just need your body to show everybody that that's what it's going to be.
What do you do on the day of the tourney to get yourself there?
I think that's evolved over time. Like, I mean, I know at the beginning, I really wanted to have like a specific routine and like a very centered aspect. And I tried a bunch of different stuff. At the end of the day, being like relaxed and with people that make you feel comfortable, I think is a really important part of that. So if it can be you and some people you're close with joking and having a good time, it almost like it takes your brain out of that pressure cooker mentality. And for me, that was like, I know some people like they just want to put their head down, not take their helmet off and fight till they're done. And that works for some people. I found for me, I'm better off just leaving the fight on the list. And when I'm off the list, just take my brain to a different place.
Were you fighting in crowns and big tournaments since you were 16 in Ealdormere?
Yeah, I mean, so I couldn't fight crown until I turned 18. So I did like you have to be age of majority in order to fight in crown. So I was fighting in every tournament I could up to that point. But I had fought. So my 19th birthday was the third crown I fought. I fought when I was 18, and then the spring the next when I was 18, and then 19. So the first crown I won was my third crown tournament.
How did you do in the previous 2 crowns?
So the first crown was like I think I made it 3 rounds and was out. I lost to Sir Siegfried, and it was I remember just being like an adrenaline overload, basically. Like I was just vibrating, and by the second fight, I was gassed. Like I was just done, right? The second crown I fought in, I made it to the semis, and it was a double elimination. So I was on the winner side of the bracket, and I fought Sir Evander, His Excellency now Sir Evander, but Sir Evander at the time, and he had to cross over. So in Ealdormere, it depends on the crown. Like it's a variable format. It's not the same every time. This particular crown, the loser side of the tree had to win twice to get past the winner side of the tree. So I came into the semis undefeated and had in my head, like, this is it, I'm going to the finals, right? And I completely choked on getting over that hump. So I remember there was like, I won the first fight. I don't remember exactly. I won one of the fights, and I like almost got him with a face thrust. And then I just spent the rest of the fight hunting that face thrust, because I was like, I was this close, and he just was patient and waited me out and ended up beating me. And afterwards I was devastated, because it was my whole life right at that point. But it was a good lesson for me to like, and that's something that I've struggled with, is that almost getting it and then just going back to it over and over and over again, right? You throw that shot and it's like the mechanics were there, everything was great, your foot wasn't 3 inches to the right, and you didn't have the power on it, and it skipped off. And then I spend the whole rest of the fight trying to recreate that scenario and hit that one shot, because if I can hit it once, I can hit it again. And it's like, well, win the fight, don't recreate that moment. But
right, you would get fixated on executing something instead of fighting what the fight presented.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
how did you discover for yourself that that visualization during cardio worked for you?
I think I was doing it, and then I realized I was doing it. So it was more something where I lost my iPod and I couldn't find it, and then I went a month of exercising without it, and I found my brain following certain paths, and then I found when I was fighting, there was an impact from it, and that was kind of it was accidental almost, right? Like I'd heard, like people have told me visualization, picture your fights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't until I started getting into that rhythm of doing it almost accidentally that I figured out that it was something that could be successful for me to work at.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was your goal to get knighted? Was it to win crown? Was it to be a duke? All of the above?
My goal was to be the best fighter on the planet.
Okay.
And I always figured that, like, that sounds egotistical. That was the thing to me, was that I can't control when I'm going to be knighted, because that is something that is voted on and something that the king and queen have at their pleasure. I can't control when I win crown, because who knows who's going to be fighting in crown? Who knows if I'm going to run into someone who happens to be a rhino that day? I can control doing everything in my power to be the best I can be. And I figured if I did that, the rest would follow. And I think there's a lot of Bronies in that for me. That was something that he helped me articulate to myself, was don't worry about any of the accoutrement, because the accoutrement will come if the work is put in. And if you're not, I'm trying not to say a bad word, but I'm not sure what your limitations are on swear words. So
no, you can say whatever you want. This isn't a show.
Work hard, don't be a dick, right? Like that's the idea.
I think that's a pretty mature attitude for how old you were. I think a lot of people get fixated on reward and having tangible markers, I guess, to sort of mark their success or to feel their success, was that hard for you at all to let go of sort of the tangible? And because I don't think it's egotistical to say you want to be the best fighter in the world, but that's probably because I've been talking to a lot of people, and that's sort of Sean's thing too, right? You want to be the best fighter in the world. So, but I think that for a lot of people, it's hard to let go of not getting the belt or not doing well in the tourney.
I think that anyone who says that they have an easy time watching someone else get knighted when they think they're ready is probably not telling the truth, right? Like, it's a really hard thing to have in your head, what else do you want from me? And see somebody else get a belt. Even if that's the feeling. So this kind of twigs into something else that I think is important to discuss. And one of the things that I think we talk a lot about in our sport is humility. And I think humility is a concept that needs a lot more explaining than we do for it. So humility, the way we express it, is often not taking praise for yourself, and it's linked to ego. But I also don't know a lot of really great fighters who don't have a lot of ego. The important thing to me is that you need to have ego, but not be a dick about your ego. So if you don't want to be the best and get pissed when someone's better than you, it's hard to get better, right? If I go out and I fight someone who I really want to beat and they are much better than me and they beat me up and I walk away from that happy, it's hard for me to get better. You need to come out of that fight going, I'm upset with myself. I'm angry that I wasn't what I needed to be. And here's what I'm going to take away with and work on, right? That's an important step to me in getting better, is being upset when you lose. The trick is that you have to do it in a way that doesn't ruin someone else's fun. So coming away from that moment and say you fight that person the next time and you dominate them, coming away from that and telling them all the ways that you dominated them isn't humility. Right. Walking away from that fight after you dominated them and saying, hey, that was a really great fight. Anything that you saw that you think I could work on? Because the reality is, no matter how good you are, that person saw something in your fight that they can give you feedback on. Like you mentioned before, it's not about measuring yourself against other people, right? It's about measuring yourself against yourself. So that sort of, I think it's human nature for people who are driven to be great or good to be upset when they're not. And that's where that watching someone else get knighted when you think you're ready comes into play, right? But at the same time, you also need to be happy for that person because they've accomplished their goal or dream, or maybe not their goal or dream, but they've achieved something, right? And if you make it about you, then it's selfish. So to me, humility, proper humility, as we describe it from a chivalric standpoint, is ego and selflessness hand in hand.
There's that quote I love about the difference between confidence and arrogance. And I like to think of that, like the difference really is humility. And it's like confidence smiles and arrogance smirks, right?
Yeah.
And I really like that because I've had a series of conversations with people about how somebody has to be arrogant to win crown. And I just don't think that's true. I think you have to be confident. And the people that we really respect that win crown multiple times are the people that aren't arrogant and that are confident because they're not a dick. Right.
Yep.
And I think one of the best traits for a peer is to be able to be genuinely happy for other people's successes, regardless of your own success. And we had talked a little bit before going live about the way to handle being upset with yourself for not being where you want to be and not being able to, and doing that in a way where you don't ruin somebody else's success. And I think that's a really fine line. I don't know how you found that for yourself. Maybe you could tell us how you did that.
So yeah, this dovetails into what I was trying to articulate about being good or being great and then not being good, right? And there's this, so something that someone told me when I was headhunting and looking for the best to fight was don't fight the king, fight the prince, or queen or princess by right of arms, because the person who won crown 6 months ago has been reigning for 6 months. The person who won crown 2 weeks ago is the best. And that concept is kind of extended when you get into, like, I'm at this point, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my life is not at the place that it was when I was doing 5 fight practices a week and driving to Detroit. It's just the reality. But coming down from being at a peak, you are going to catch people who are peaking. And there's an important understanding to have that that person sees you at your peak. Regardless of where you are in your descent, they saw you at your peak, and in their head, you are still at that peak. So they are measuring themselves against the image that they have of you. And I think it's really important that we conceptualize that if after you fight that person and they get the better of you, if you start rationalizing why they got the better of you, you rob them of their victory and you rob them of their training moment. So if that person fought me at Pinzik and then I didn't fight for a year and they fought me at Pinzik the next year and they wiped the floor with me and I turn around and say, yeah, well, I didn't fight in a year, it completely takes the wind out of their sails for the training and the hard work that they did to get to a point where they're going to beat me. And I don't know exactly how to articulate that, but I think it's important not to lose that when you come off that peak, you need to make sure that you're still being gracious about who you are and encouraging people because they are on their journey and it isn't linear with yours.
Right. And it's not, I think there's a way to congratulate somebody for getting better and improving and internalize with yourself without verbalizing.
Yes.
This isn't where I want to be, and next time we fight, I'm going to do better, right? Because I don't think I've ever had like what you've had about, you know, being at your peak and then coming back and having people come after you. But after I had a baby and I came back, I did have people do that, and you know, and they would say things, and I'd be like, well, I just had a baby, you know, like,
yeah,
I'm not going to be what I was 2 years ago, right? Like, but in the same breath, you can't take away the fact that they have been training and, you know, they legitimately were better than you that day, and that's great for them. But I guess my point is that it goes both ways. Like, you don't have to be a dick about beating your hero either, right? Like,
well, I don't know.
you can be a dick.
I think you can be a dick about beating your hero, because okay. I think someone's only a hero if you like, I'm not saying that I'm somebody's hero, but I think someone only becomes a hero by being somebody that you worship. Like I'm not gonna lie, every time that I've hit Bronies in the helm, I've been really happy about it. And the reason of that is because in my mind, he is unkillable. Right? So it's I think, I mean, not that I would gloat about it, but I wouldn't be upset if somebody gloated about killing me because they earned it. I don't know. So.
I think there's a difference between gloating about killing you and saying something like, oh, that's a duke. Right? Like that, yeah, there's a difference there.
That's fair. I'll give you
yeah. So I actually think that's really interesting. I have the same sort of thing about people like Bronies where you know, anything you get in or even make them work like hard, it's sort of a success, right? Because you have to have your victory conditions.
Right.
So I agree with that. Like, yes, if you hit Bronies in the helm, woohoo, good day.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, so let's talk about you winning your first crown. Did you feel different mentally on that day?
So there was a moment in the semis when it changed for me. So I fought Duke Edward Beausoleil in the semis of that crown, and I think he'd won 4 or 5 crowns at that point. So he was in my head. It was his crown to lose, right? At that point, and I took him out in the semis. And it was a moment for me when the narrative in my head shifted from like I'm just out here to do the best I can to this is it, I'm going for this. And interestingly, because it was Watt and I in the finals, so actually, His Grace Nigel will probably never forgive either of us for this, but Nigel loves great weapons and spear fighting and matched weapons forms. And the way he wrote his finals was it was matched weapons chosen by pattern of combatants, but he didn't stipulate that you couldn't repeat weapons forms. So Watt and I fought 3 rounds of sword and shield in the finals of Crown Tournament, when the expectation that I'm sure Nigel had going in was that he was going to see a spear fight and maybe a polearm fight and then a sword and shield fight. So it was, the finals were basically fight practice for me, because it was Watt and I doing what we'd been doing 3 times a week for the last year. But I definitely noticed in my head after beating Beausoleil, it switched to, instead of like my mentality switched from what's the best I can do this day to this is my tournament, I'm going to win this tournament.
And that didn't mess you up at all? Like,
I don't know if this is speaking out of school, but in between the semis and the finals, Beausoleil actually took me aside, handed me his shield, said, "This is my last fight ever in the SCA," and quit the hobby.
whoa. How do you recover from that? Like,
and I was like, did I miss a shot? Did I, like, this guy who in my mind is like Uber Duke of the kingdom, like there was a lot of other stuff going on which clearly had nothing to do with me. I was just Joe Blow Squire who was having a good day, and that was that, right? So my brain was all over the place at that point. And fortunately the finals were with Watt, and it just was, I came back to fight practice and it was what it was. And I remember just talking to Dagmar in between and being like, this just happened, because she was my consort, obviously, for the first and second rank. Coming back to Kirsten being like, this just happened, like, what do I do? And she's like, go win crown. Like, that's what happens now. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go win crown now. So.
wow.
Yeah.
Was it indeed his last fight, or did he come back?
I believe he might have fought at a fight practice, but I'm pretty sure that was his last fight in tourney in the SCA.
Wow. I congratulations to you for not letting that totally fuck with your mind, because that has the real potential to have done that, right?
I feel like in the moment it was like there was so much going on anyway that I almost couldn't really conceptualize. Like, I don't think I actually really was aware of the impact until afterwards. Like, there's this bright-eyed newbie quality where it's like it's my 3rd crown and I'm just, here we go, I'm gonna fight crown. Like, I wasn't even fully in the SCA enough to understand the backstory of what that kind of a moment is, right?
So was there sort of a I don't want to say wake up call, but were there things about reigning that you weren't expecting? Like, was it a bigger thing than you thought it was going to be?
So interestingly, and this is part of where I think there's a lesson from my path for younger fighters who are fighting in crown, is fight for somebody who knows what they're doing, right? So I fought crown for Dagmar. Dagmar is an amazing person with a network of people who love her and support her, and is very well respected and knows a lot of intricacies of the game. And she and I had spent at that point 3 years together of planning what it was going to be like to fight crown and training together. And she and I drove to Gulf Wars when I was 16, the 2 of us, and spent 18 hours in a car talking about what it was going to be like to win crown and reign. So while I was quite young, it wasn't, I wasn't going into it without having put the thought behind it. And I give her a ton of credit for being my sounding board and carrying me in a lot of ways because she came with the knowledge and the experience that I didn't have. I mean, anytime it's a first reign, there's always things that are going to happen that aren't what you're expecting, but she really was amazing. I mean, she is amazing. I shouldn't say was amazing. She is amazing, right? So
Yeah. I think it's amazing that you guys had those kind of conversations and really planned it out, because you know, a lot of people don't. They just don't they don't put a lot of thought into what happens after the tournament win, right?
I think
At least at the beginning.
This might be an Ealdormere cultural thing. There's this narrative that tends to happen in Ealdormere of like, don't fight crown unless you're ready to win it. And when I came up, there was this dialogue of well, what if everyone gets food poisoning that day? You need to be able to win it. And I actually almost think it's, in some ways, it goes too far in the other direction, where we discourage people from fighting in crown, because we have this narrative of be ready if in case, right? Because in reality, like, not to disparage people, but most of the time you can predict the top 4 or the top 6 that are going to come out of a tournament before you get to the day of crown, right? So I think it does people a disservice to tell someone don't fight in crown, when in reality the only way you get better at fighting in crown is by fighting in crown. It's unique to anything else. So and in a kingdom like Ealdormere, which is small and tight knit, nobody's going to let somebody fail, right? Like if for some reason somebody has that superhuman day and everything goes their way, there's a network of people who are going to support them. No one's going to leave somebody up there on the throne to collapse. But because of that narrative, I had spent a lot of time thinking about it going in. So, and some of it I was completely wrong about how it would go. But
I think that's probably normal too.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my kingdom, it's not normal, or it doesn't happen very often that an unbelt wins crown. Is that something that happens in Ealdormere, or were you sort of an anomaly?
I think I was a relative anomaly. Malik had won as an unbelt before me, and I believe they knighted him before I stepped up. So I think it was an anomaly to win crown and sit as an unbelted king. But I was also the youngest person to win crown ever in Ealdormere. I mean, I think there were a few in the early days before, when we were principality, but in terms of actually during the time where we had sitting kings and queens, I would say I'm the youngest by a decade. So it kind of doesn't fit I think there's something for people about knighting a 19-year-old. Be that as it may. So.
Okay. I kind of want to explore that a little bit further, because I've talked to a few people now who have reigned unbelted, or who were very, very young when they got knighted, and or weren't knighted because people thought they were too young. And it seems like there's been a real shift over probably the last 2 decades about what young is in the SCA. And for you, I mean, 18, 19 is young. I mean, that's young for anyone, right? But did you feel like there was any sort of hindrance in your reign because you were so young, or because you weren't knighted?
No, I never felt like anyone thought less of me or stood in my way because of it. I felt more, I don't know, I'm putting words in the mouths of an order who probably will not be happy for me to put words in their mouths, but I felt that it was more along the lines of that, they didn't want me to have everything right away, right? Like, if someone takes all the cookies out of the jar in the first 3 years, then what's the incentive to keep pushing? That was kind of the sense that I got. I could be completely wrong on that, but
that's your perception, right? So,
sorry, yeah, and I was unpolished, undoubtedly. There's no doubt about that. I needed a push to look the part. I fought the part, but I didn't look the part, and that was something that I had a lot of help with after winning crown. And I think that was part of it too, right? Was okay, great. So the 19-year-old won crown. Can he be the king that we want him to be, right?
And you rose to the occasion.
I hope so. That's not really for me to say.
Well, but I mean, reigning does help you look the part. Like it's inevitably going to, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's a whole network of people, both my people and Dagmar's people, who really stepped up and made me garb and told me to get rid of my work boots and put some covers on my shoes, and you know, like the finer details that when you're an unbelt maybe you can let slide, but when you're the king, it's not going to fly. And it was an explanation too to me of that idea that like you're representing everybody, right? When you stand up there on the field at Pinzik, you are Ealdormere, and if you don't represent Ealdormere to your fullest, then it looks bad on the kingdom, right?
So what was your favorite part about reigning the first time?
I have so many great memories of that reign. It's really hard to peel one of them out. I think that the whole experience with Dagmar of achieving something together really kind of like it overshadows everything else, because it was a really positive experience of being war king at Pinzik. And like I had this goal of going to the state dinner as king and not being able to drink at Pinzik. So I had this goal to order chocolate milk at state dinner because I couldn't drink at Pinzik, right? So little things like that were just like she and I had talked about for so long that we actually got to bring to fruition. I got to knight Baldric, Sir Baldric, and we got to have his knight. I don't know if this is a SCA-wide tradition, but an Ealdormere, an unbelted king, doesn't hold the sword out of state. So we actually got his knight to come out of retirement down to Pinzik to hold the sword, and we got to knight Baldric at Pinzik. And it just, like things like that just stand out for me and will always stand out for me as moments to hold. But really, the whole experience the first time around was unforgettable.
How big of a deal was it for you to be king at Pinzik? Are you as much of a melee junkie as you are like a one-on-one junkie, singles?
No. I not to disparage the fine art of melee, but if I could fight tournaments all the time, I would only fight tournaments. But that having been said, Pinzik is a very unique experience, right? So I loved the battles and leading the charges and being part of all of it. I also, both times that I've been king at Pinzik, I've fenced for, the second time I fenced for every war point and fought every war point. The first time I think I might have missed one or two, but it was important for me to, Dagmar also fought and fenced the entire first war that we were king and queen. We fought and fenced every war point together. Melee is what it is, and it's fun, but I enjoy the contest of singles fighting, and I have tunnel vision, and that person over there with the spear is going to kill me, and I'm not going to even see it coming. So.
No judgment at all. I am totally a pickup fighter. That's my favorite thing in the whole planet is pickup fighting. I'm not a melee person, so.
My happy place is that tree at Gulf Wars, and just living under there and walking around and kicking people until they fight me. So.
Cool. So His Grace Stephen of Beckingham wants you to tell a story about breaking Hans's nose at the Midfield retreat.
I thought that was going to come up. You had him on a couple weeks back, didn't you?
Yeah, a couple months ago.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, okay. So I watched it a couple weeks ago. So I might get parts of this wrong. I don't know if His Grace might have to elaborate. But so I don't know. Do you know Savarik from the Middle Kingdom? His Excellency Savarik Diprogio. So he won crown as an unbelt of the Mid Realm at the same time that I had won crown as well. So I got invited to the Mid Realm Shiv retreat, and the mid-realm shiver. I don't know if you know what the mid-realm shiver treat is. It's basically
It sounds like heaven.
It was amazing. So and as an unbelt, I got invited. I got to go down with His Majesty Sir Nigel at the time, and I'm wide-eyed, and I made the executive decision to stop wearing leg armor the morning of the mid-realm shiver treat, and I got my leg turned into hamburger. In particular, I remember I was fighting His Grace Edmund, and we were double killing, and I would hit him in the head, and he would throw 2 shots and hit me in the back of the head and hit me in the leg, and I would just drop like a sack. And then I would get up and we would do it again. And it was just punishment over and over and over again. So we got back to the hotel, and from my knee to my hip was just a giant hematoma. Like, it was black, red, disgusting. And I couldn't put any weight on it. And we proceeded to, sorry, this must have been the second time I won Crown, because I was legal to drink in the States. So I would have been Prince at the time. So we proceeded to enjoy our libations, and we were all hanging out and drinking together. And His Grace Aaron from Ealdormere, who can be a bit of a shit disturber sometimes, leans over to Hansa and says, "Hey, Hansa, punch Quill in the leg." And Hansa, not knowing anything of what's going on, reaches over and just smacks me in the leg. And I just reaction backhanded like this, right into his nose. He grabs his nose like this, walks over to the garbage can, and blood just erupts out of his nose. And his nose is like this. And all I remember is him leaning over the garbage can going, "My bad, my bad, my bad." So then the entire rest of the weekend, every time I came near everyone was just, sorry.
I met Aaron at an Adult Swim. He is kind of a shit disturber.
Yeah, in the best possible way.
Yes.
I don't think he predicted that being the result of that action, but yeah. The lesson that I learned was don't take your leg armor off for the shiver treat.
I have made a similar mistake before one of Sean's practices. I decided not to wear leg armor anymore. And that's just stupid. You know, you're going out of the area and you decide to take your leg armor off. Yeah. Not bright. Learn from our mistake.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Funny. So you reigned 3 more times after your first reign. And you've reigned with 3 different people.
Yes.
Right? What are some of the highlights from your other reigns?
So Domhnall, who was my second queen, was actually Edward Beausoleil won her first crown for her, and she was a countess at the time. And actually, this gets into a piece that I don't know if we missed, but you asked what my favorite piece of regalia that I've gotten was on our discussion time. So this is Quilliam's big horn, which is a carved drinking horn that was given to me by Duchess Domhnall and Count Corwin. And it basically has carved into it all of my household sigils and everything related to it. Sorry.
Was that for your duchy?
This was for my 19th birthday.
Oh, wow.
They filled it with blue Kool-Aid and vodka and made me drink the whole thing.
Were you sick?
I was.
Okay. I think anytime people drink a lot of blue stuff, they get sick. It's just a rule.
It is.
Yeah.
There was a bucket expressly for that purpose.
I guess we did sort of skip your knighting. I'm guessing your knighting wasn't a surprise.
It was like being put on vigil. I was a surprise. I didn't know it was coming.
Okay.
But there was like the actual knighting itself, there was a lot of lead up to. So I was hoping it would happen because it was after I'd won my second crown, and I was having that moment of I'm not sure what else I can do at this point, and that's what happened. So
cool. Was your ceremony what you wanted?
It was, absolutely, yeah. I think I might have taken up a little bit too much air in the room, to be honest with you, in retrospect, but it was everything that I wanted it to be, and my vigil was everything that I wanted it to be, and there was a lot of special people who made it special for me.
Very cool.
Yeah, so.
All right, so let's go back to your favorite parts about reigning with the other 2, because my sister interviewed Tongue Whistle,
yes.
and she's amazing.
she is an absolutely lovely lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're still very close with them, even though they've abandoned us for the far reaches of British Columbia. So,
Ontario.
So Domhnall was my first foray into the Tudor world. So I spent 2 reigns being a Viking of various Viking-ish, and my lovely lady is Tudor, and Domhnall and Corwin jumped on board with the Tudor, and we did a Tudor reign, which was glorious. And the thing that is delightful about Domhnall and Corwin is they are artisans and they're very giving of their art, and they love, like, that was a gift to me that they felt inspired to give me. Nobody asked them to. It was something that they just did for me. And reigning alongside someone of those sensibilities is a beautiful thing, because they bring that to everything that they do, right? And that reign in particular stands out to me the moment we got to make the first Master of Defense of Ealdormere. And Giovanni Dianzinas was the person that we elevated to that role, and he is exactly the person that should be the premier order of that, master of that order. And it was a big moment. I mean, there's a lot encompassed in that from a SCA standpoint, but that decision that she and I got to make together really stands out to me as the right decision. Like, when you look back and you say that was the right call, right? And I feel that to this day, that was the right call, and I'm happy that we made it. Tangwistle is also Tudor. Tangwistle is the Tudor of Tudors and personifies Tudor, and she's amazing at it. And she and my wife were quite close, and they made me all the lovely trappings that go along with being a Tudor king. But it was especially important for me. Like, there's a lot that went into winning with her and reigning with her, because she's somebody who has crafted this game for 30 years, 40 years. And there's so much of, like, the traditions and lifeblood of my kingdom and the Middle Kingdom that have flowed through her. So to get to be the person who completed that chapter for her and like, took that final step of that page turn, and we got to do it together, was a really magical journey. And Pinzik with her as my queen was a really special thing, because I don't, like, you can know that somebody has had impact on people's lives in the abstract, but then when you go to Pinzik and every time you come around a corner, someone who you've never met comes up to you and says, that was my queen in AS, and you have done a great thing by making her the queen again. And people who would tell me these stories from following her and being in her entourage from decades ago, and how much it meant to them that she got to do this again and she got to be their figurehead again, was a really special feeling for me. So I don't really know how else to put it in words, but it felt like being part of something bigger, if that makes sense. Like, I got to be the little key turn, which kind of set in motion this series of events, which were bigger than anything that I could be.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed watching her interview. She's just so gracious and so passionate about what she does without belittling anyone who doesn't go to her level, right?
Yes.
It's just a really unique personality, I think. I look forward to meeting her when we can all do events again, because now we're actually, I guess she's like 2 hours away from me. So yeah. Very cool.
She's a special person, and she's a boon to your kingdom for sure.
Okay.
We miss her very much.
Well, hopefully when we get to play, we will welcome her and make her feel at home. I know that it must be weird for her to be in a kingdom where really nobody knew who she was, after, being such a big part of the Middle Kingdom and Ealdormere traditions. So, okay. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about? Because we're almost at an hour, so I'm thinking maybe we should wrap up.
Okay. How much of this did you want to talk about? Like, does that mean we're done, or We got 5 minutes left, or where
No. Like I would go and we would look at your sword if you brought your sword, and then I would
did
do
actually. I was wondering if we want to go through that stuff because I think it's
Yeah.
interesting.
I definitely do.
So I know you're talking about bringing swords and what they look like. I'll just show you in general. Something that I in particular had done on my weapons, which I have found to be an important part of my path, is I actually had these custom basket hilts made for me that have a double row of bar here, and they're weighted significantly so that the weight of my sword is always in my hand. And it changes the balance of the sword significantly to put that weight down at the bottom of my hand. One other thing that comes out of that from a training standpoint, because we were talking about training tools, I don't know if you can see this little puppy here. So this is a rock climbing grip strength exercise tool, and this for me is my commute tool. So when I'm driving, half an hour on one hand, half an hour on the other hand. And what I found is coupling the hilt heavy sword with the grip strength, and that couples into the Bronies final snap, right? That closing the hand for the power thing. That was a big difference maker for me from a mechanic standpoint. So I highly recommend if anyone is looking for a COVID related training tool, these little puppies are amazing.
You're not the first person to say that. I think Duke Mark also recommends grip strength as well. I'm wondering, do you like the weight in your hand because of the whip motion? Like, do you think it gives you a better fulcrum or?
Yeah, so a big part of my game is offside. Like it's a faux moulinet. So it's like throwing a moulinet, but halfway through the moulinet, you just punch your hand down. So it changes the angle. Instead of coming in on the outside, it like comes straight down into either the forearm or the body. And having that weight in my hand lets me do that without destroying my elbow. Because otherwise, that big twist motion can really pop that elbow out. So that was the main focus for me. And then as well, getting that drop on the slot shot across the front in my hand so that I can tip the tip back and forth wherever I want it to go across the top is the key part of that.
How long is your sword?
36 inches exactly, plus thrusting tip. Only because I am cheap and I buy 9-foot lengths of rattan, and I want to get 3 swords out of every piece of rattan that I buy.
That's what my husband says too. He won't let me have a longer one, so I get it. Is there anything else special about your sword?
So I always buy over large rattan, and then I use a hand planer to plane down to exactly the right distance this way. And then I wrap with spiral tape and then do a nylon webbing over the tip before doing the final on it. It lessens the lifespan of them, but I find that it also helps add the weight that I want to the sword to give me that snap power. So
His Grace, His Grace of Buckingham just wants to know how much your sword weighs, if you know.
I could go weigh it if you want.
No, you okay. Maybe you could weigh it later, and in the comments you can answer him.
Sounds good. And then the other one that I wanted to show you was my shield. So I have this to look like a canvas covered, but in reality, you can see here that this is actually puckboard, which is what we make hockey rinks out of in Canada. And what I've done is I have it covered both sides in Kevlar, and I join the Kevlar with the contact cement on the back side. So I cover the whole thing in contact cement, I wrap around the front, and then I wrap around the back. And what ends up happening is the Kevlar becomes like a one-piece sleeve, which never, even if it detaches from the front, it can't go anywhere because it's essentially attached to it. And it's strong enough that it doesn't give way, and it takes the impact off the sword impacts on the sides, so you're not destroying people's swords.
So I've never heard of puckboard. Is that something that you can buy at Home Depot in Canada?
No, so I buy it from like an actual, like I buy sheets of it from a local distributor who sells to hockey rink instructors. And I think like a 4x8 sheet cost me around $35. Okay. And then I cut it into blanks. And my plan originally was like, yeah, I'll go through a blank every 1 or 2 years. And I think I've used 2. So I actually have ended up selling off a couple of them to people just at cost. So.
And where do you get the Kevlar?
Also from actually an upholstery distributor. So they cover things in Kevlar. It's incredibly hard to work with because you can't cut it. And you're going to burn through a number of knives or tin snips or whatever. But once you get it in place, it lasts Like my biggest problem with shields was always that I could never get one to last, right? Canvas covering, edging, all of that. Anytime I used to use metal, but anytime I used aluminum, it's basically like a knife cutting the edge of it, right? So this was the solution that I found that is lighter, which is, I mean, maybe it's sport armor, but at the same time, it's almost indestructible because that the puckboard is made for being smashed into, right, by hockey players.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's cool. I've never heard anybody use puckboard and Kevlar. Somebody wants to know how much your shield weighs.
I will also weigh that and put it in the comments.
Okay.
My sword is too heavy and my shield is too light. Let's put it that way.
And then somebody else wants to know, where did you get the shape of your shield from?
So I was given a round a really long time ago, and this part of the round got completely chewed off. It was a wooden shield, and I cut the side of the round off, and I ended up with this. So it's kind of it's would be a round, but the sides are cut off to make it into an oval.
It kind of looks like a scutum with rounded top and bottom.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And it is 30, I think it's 30 inches top to bottom and around 20 inches across.
And how tall are you?
6'3"-ish.
Okay. You've been 6'3" since you were 15?
I'm 6'2". Yeah, I was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
People were like, "What is that grown up doing in the youth combat ring?"
That must have been really tough for you. My nephew is like 6'5" or 6'6", and he's 6. He just turned, I guess maybe he turned 17, but he's been that tall for a very long time, and it's really hard because people don't treat him like his age. He doesn't look.
Yeah, the other problem is that I know for me anyway, being 6'2" at 14 is not coordinated 6'2", right? Like it's all arms and elbows and knees, and there's a lot of refinement to be done.
All right, so should we do the final 10?
Sure.
All right. What event have you never gone to that you would like to go to?
Sport of Kings.
Sport of Kings. Yay. If you decide to go, we will hook you up with bedding and tentage and all of that stuff. And I would love for you to teach. Just putting it out there.
All right. Once there's a vaccine, we'll have that conversation again.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. If you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
So are you still going to ask me who my favorite fight ever is at the end? Because
sure.
these two kind of similar to me.
Okay.
So if there was a person I could fight, and I know there's a lot of great fighters out there, but the person that I have had the most consistent fun fighting was a Sir Havard from Detroit, and I'm not sure how active he is anymore, but he and I were training along with each other, and he is a 6'6". He was a 6'6" bodybuilder, and he was just a massive human being. And he and I had some really great times going back and forth with each other. So if there was a person I could fight, it would be him.
Excellent. What is your favorite Pinzik story, if you haven't already told me?
That's a hard one. I mean, the Milk at State dinner was pretty good, but I also had some great times with Duke Miles from Out Your Way the last time.
He's super fun.
Yeah, he and I were both king last time I was at Pinzik, and we had a pretty great time doing unkingly things. So I think he enjoyed finding someone else who could take the crown off a little bit, and we had a great time together.
He unintentionally taught my niece how to cuss.
There you go. Sounds about right.
Who are your favorite people to watch fight?
Bronies and Ronwalder.
Together, or them fighting anyone?
Actually, fighting separately. I love watching Ronwalder's fights on. Like, there's so much intention in the way that he moves. It's beautiful to watch. And Bronies is just like an angry pit bull. Like
but calculated.
Like just takes over the fight and stomps somebody down. I think my favorite fight of his that I watched him and Valharik fight in Heroic Champs one year at Pinzik. And it was like, it was this calculated tactical back and forth, and every step had intent, and it was just beautiful to watch.
Excellent. Let's see, where are we? Do you have a hero or an inspiration in the SCA, and if so, who is it?
I've said his name a bunch, but put me in the Bronies camp. So yeah.
It's a popular answer.
I don't. There's a reason why.
Yeah, he's definitely earned it. I mean, he's just such a class act.
I think the thing that, like, when we talk about that humility, like, I don't think I've ever met anyone who is as good as he is, who is as good at making people feel good about themselves, right? Like, he has that ability to tailor both his fight and his training to exactly the level that you need to get better. And there's a lot of people who are good at it, but he is far and away the best, in my opinion.
Yeah. If you had to recommend one event in your kingdom for someone out of kingdom to go to, what would it be?
I'm going to be biased to tourney fighting and say Lady Mary Memorial Tournament. It's like our non-crown tournament. It's the warm up to crown, I would say. And it's where all the people who aren't fighting in crown because they don't want to win go and beat each other up.
What time of year?
It moved. I think it was in the spring before. I think they moved it to the fall now. I'd have to check what the current scheduling is.
Cool.
But it's a good tournament.
What book do you think everyone on the path to knighthood should read?
These were on my preparation list, so
I'm sorry. I mixed them up like when I hit 50 dukes so that it wouldn't get monotonous.
That's good. It's all good. I would say I'm not sure where to go on that one, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna
favorite movie.
I would like to go off. I think Tolkien is actually a very important thing for anyone on the book to path to knighthood to read. And I know that might not be, like, I know a lot of people probably have answers related to chivalry, etc. But I think one of the most important parts of our game is the like the magic and the spectacle of it. And that's where I fell in love with the magic and the spectacle of it. And I mean, the mid-realm Oath of Fealty is, I've heard rumors, loosely based off the Oath of Fealty from Tolkien, and I think there's a reason for that, right? It pulls on something.
The on tier one is the same.
Yep.
Okay, so how about we do what is your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
I may catch flack for this, but I'm a fan of A Knight's Tale.
You're not alone.
It's a guilty pleasure. So a painful watch sometimes. Some of those hairdos are a little bit much, but
the ball scene kind of loses me, but
yeah,
otherwise it's pretty good.
I would also throw a Princess Bride in there. That's another one. There you go.
Yeah. Let's see. If you could change one thing about the SCA, what would it be? So
this actually is kind of a bigger thing. So I know we're at the end of the interview, but I think if there's one thing that we as a society need to change, it's tracking on our actions and how they relate to inclusivity. So I think there's a trap that we fall into where we're hanging out with our friends and we're treating it sometimes as just a laugh around and joke around. And I think some people don't track on what it means to have a knight or a squire or a peer or a king or a queen or a princess say something that could be off color or hurtful. And I think we don't do a good enough job of holding each other accountable. So I don't think the issue is that things get said, because I think if we police ourselves too much from the standpoint of not saying the thing, then people are gonna just clam up and not say something. But I think where the important action is being the person who calls out the behavior. So if I'm a knight and my squire makes a comment about a woman's bosom being exposed, I need to stand up and say, hey, that's not okay. Right? Like, and I think that's true across the board, from knights, from squires, regardless of where you are in our hierarchy that we've developed. I think we need to be better at calling each other out when we are not being our best, because I think that's the only way we get better. And I think it's important for people to see us holding each other accountable, because then they feel that they're not on the outside and being stuck. I think the other thing, sorry, I'm going to keep going on this one.
No, I think this is an important topic.
The other thing that I thought of a lot leading up to this interview, and it actually caused me to do some soul searching on my end, is I think we unfairly put the pressure on, I'm going to use the word victims, but victims isn't the right word, to stand up when they have a problem. So we do this thing where we say, well, our doors are always open, come talk to us and tell us when we've done something wrong. But that puts somebody who feels that something's been done wrong in the place of having to call out somebody who is probably in a position of power. And that in and of itself is incredibly problematic. I think it's really important for us, particularly as knights and dukes and duchesses and members of the Order of the Laurel and the Pelican and the Order of Defense, to look through our history and say, where do I feel squeamish about my behavior? Right? Is there a moment that I don't like thinking about because I think I might have hurt someone, or I might have been out of line? And I think it's important for us to do that self-examination and then reach out to those people and say, hey, I feel crappy about how my behavior was in this situation. And I don't expect anything from you, and I don't expect you to accept my apology, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. And I think I could have been better. And I actually did that leading up to this interview. I did that a couple of times because I think it's important to walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk. And I had people respond to me and say, in some cases, yes, I was hurt, but it was a long time ago, and there's a lot of things, and talk it out. And I had some people say, hey, I didn't feel like there was anything wrong. That isn't at all how it came across to me, and we're good. But I do think it behooves us to self-examine in that way, because if we don't, then we're just pushing people further and further away.
I agree 100%. I think anytime you have like that little feeling in your chest after you said something, or like a conversation went weird, you should always at least try to say, hey, I think maybe that didn't come off the way that I intended, or I think maybe I said something that was hurtful. And then you get back from the person, whether or not, I mean, it's a hard thing to do, yeah. But I think it's important that we do it, because I think too often we just try to push it down or push it away. And then people, especially people that aren't in a position of power, feel disenfranchised.
Exactly. Well, and it bugs me to have a narrative of, because nobody's saying there's a problem, or nobody's approaching us to say that there's a problem, so there isn't a problem. Or to say, well, we asked this person if there was a problem and they said there wasn't a problem, so there's no problem. It's like, well, that in and of itself does not absolve us of the responsibility of doing our due diligence and examining these situations to make sure that we're the best that we can be in all of our aspects of the game.
Yeah, and I think it's not that hard in a situation to see somebody react to something, and know that maybe that they might have been offended, and then to reach out to them, or to talk to the person that said it and said, hey, they had a physical reaction to what you said. Maybe you need to follow up.
Well, and that's exactly where I think that holding each other accountable is an important thing, right? Because there are some of us who aren't as good at reading the room and missing the cues. But part of being a person who misses the cues is acknowledging when the people around you point the cues out to you, right? So maybe you are oblivious to it and you missed it, but that means that it's my responsibility as your brother at arms, sister at arms, to say to you, I saw this happen. You might want to check in on this and make sure it was okay. And call out actions in the moment too, right? While they're happening. I don't think it's enough to just, if you see someone who is having a negative reaction, to wait and talk to them afterwards. because it might be a negative reaction for that one person, but if there's 6 other people around who heard it, then they walk away from that situation feeling like that behavior is okay.
Right.
And that's why I think it's important that we call that stuff out.
And you know, honestly, we haven't been good in the past about doing that at all.
No, and I think there's a narrative that we have in some circles. Like, I think some people honestly believe that, and I don't think they're bad people, I just think they honestly believe that we're better at it than we are. And I think we need to remember that there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Duke Steven is saying something, but he basically agrees with you, so that's good. All right, so the last question. What do you think is the most important trait to become a successful fighter?
I mean, that obsession word you threw around is pretty important. I think the better word is perseverance, because it isn't a linear path. And for me, like I said, I put a lot of life on hold in order to be good. And now a lot of my life has come back, and now I'm not as good as I used to be. And someday I'll want to be good again, and it's going to take a lot of perseverance to become good again. But I think it's critical to just keep getting up, right? And surround yourself with people who enable your success instead of detracting from it. So fighting partners, sparring partners, life partners who believe in you and push you to be better in all ways, I think is really important, right? Like going to fight practice and just fighting the same 2 people every week who don't push you to be any better isn't going to make you a better fighter. But driving 4 hours to an event in a different kingdom to fight people you've never fought before is. So I think it's important to think about the quality of the time that you're putting in as well as the quantity.
Very cool. Well, I really want to thank you for this. I really enjoyed talking to you. It's been very educational, and it went into some topics that I wasn't expecting, and it was super cool. I hope someday we get to meet in person.
I'm going to take you up on that Sport of Kings offer at some point.
Well, it's open. It's open. So, all right. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Your Grace, for your time and for sharing your journey and all your insights. This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.